Imagine walking down a quiet street, minding your own business, when suddenly a group of bikers pulls up, hurling racist insults at you. But what they don't know is, you're not just any teenager. What happens next will leave you speechless. Jamal's story starts like so many others, walking home from school in Chicago, headphones in, trying to block out the world. But today, the world wouldn't let him. A roar of engines shattered the quiet as a group of bikers pulled up beside him on a quiet side street near Lincoln Park. At first, it seemed like they were just passing by, but then the comments started. Racist slurs, sneers, and threats filled the air. These weren't just words, they were weapons, meant to cut deep, to make Jamal feel small, powerless, and afraid. The bikers, led by a guy named Brad, circled him, revving their engines, their laughter loud and cruel. Brad got off his bike, towering over Jamal, demanding he go back to where he came from. The others, Mike, Derek, and a few others, egged him on, their voices a chorus of hate. Jamal's heart raced. Had faced racism before, but never like this. Never with this level of aggression. Never with this many people against him. Here's the thing about Jamal, though. He wasn't just any teenager. For years, had been training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at a gym in downtown Chicago. Not because he wanted to fight, but because he wanted to feel safe in a world that didn't always make him feel that way. His coach, Marcus, had always told him, the best fight is the one you avoid. But what happens when avoiding isn't an option? The bikers didn't know about his training. They didn't know about the hours Head spent perfecting his moves, the discipline Head built, or the quiet confidence that came with knowing he could defend himself if he had to. To them, he was just a target, someone they thought they could intimidate without consequence. But as Brad stepped closer, fists clenched, Jamal had a split-second decision to make. Run and risk being chased down? Or stand his ground, knowing it could escalate things even further? What would you do if you were in his shoes? The tension was palpable. Brad and his crew were waiting for Jamal to break, to show fear, to give them the satisfaction of knowing they'd won. But Jamal wasn't backing down. Not this time. The question wasn't just about whether he could fight. It was about whether he... And in that moment, everything hung in the balance. As Brad stepped closer, his fists clenched and his face twisted into a sneer, Jamal's mind raced. He could feel the weight of every moment Head spent training, every punch, every drill, every time his coach, Marcus, had pushed him to his limits. But this wasn't the gym. This was real life, and the stakes were higher than any sparring match. The other bikers, Mike, Derek, and the rest, formed a loose circle around them, their laughter fading into tense silence. They were waiting for Brad to make the first move, to show them how tough he was. Brad lunged, swinging a wild punch aimed straight at Jamal's face. But Jamal's reflexes kicked in. He ducked, sidestepping the blow with the precision of someone who'd practiced this 1,000 times. Brad stumbled, caught off guard. For a split second, there was confusion in his eyes. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. He swung again, harder this time, but Jamal blocked it effortlessly, his movements calm and controlled. The bikers started to murmur, their confidence wavering. Jamal didn't throw a punch. Not yet. He knew that once he did, there was no turning back. Instead, he kept his guard up, his eyes locked on Brad. "You don't have to do this," Jamal said, his voice steady. But Brad wasn't listening. He charged again, this time aiming for a tackle. That's when Jamal made his move. Using Brad's momentum against him, he twisted his body and swept Brad's legs out from under him. Brad hit the ground hard, the air knocked out of him. The other bikers froze, their bravado crumbling. But Jamal didn't press the advantage. He stood his ground, his breathing even, his eyes scanning the group. "Anyone else?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances. They hadn't signed up for this. What would you do if you were in Jamal's position, standing tall against a group that underestimated you? The tension in the air was thick. The bikers were no longer laughing, no longer taunting. They were realizing, maybe for the first time, that Jamal wasn't just some kid they could push around. He was someone who could fight back and win. But the question remained, would they walk away, or would this escalate even further? Brad was on the ground, gasping for air, but the fight wasn't over. Mike, the tallest of the bikers, stepped forward, his face red with anger. "You think you're tough, kid?" he spat, pulling a switchblade from his pocket. The blade flicked open, catching the sunlight. The other bikers backed up, their eyes wide. This had just gotten real. Jamal's heart pounded, but he didn't flinch. Head trained for moments like this, though he never thought Head actually faced them. Marcus, his coach, had always said, "Fear is normal. It's what you do with it that matters." Jamal took a deep breath, his eyes locked on the knife. He knew one wrong move could change everything. Mike lunged, slashing wildly. Jamal dodged the first strike, but the second grazed his arm, leaving a thin red line. The pain was sharp, but it only fueled his focus. He waited for an opening, his movements calculated. When Mike swung again, Jamal caught his wrist, twisting it hard until the knife clattered to the ground. With a quick, fluid motion, Jamal swept Mike's legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the pavement. The other bikers stared, frozen. Derek, the loudest of the group, started to step forward, but Jamal turned to him, his voice low and steady. "Don't." That one word carried the weight of everything Jamal had been through. The racism, the bullying, the hours of training. It wasn't just a warning, it was a statement. Derek hesitated, then slowly raised his hands and backed away. The bikers helped Brad and Mike to their feet, their earlier bravado completely gone. They didn't say a word as they climbed back on their bikes and sped off, leaving Jamal standing alone on the quiet Chicago street. But here's the thing, Jamal didn't feel victorious. He felt exhausted, his hands trembling as the adrenaline faded. He looked down at the cut on his arm, a reminder of how close things had gotten. What would you have done if you were staring down a blade with no one to back you up? The silence that followed was deafening. Jamal had won, but at what cost? Head stood up for himself, but the weight of what had just happened settled heavily on his shoulders. This wasn't just a fight, it was a moment that would stay with him forever. And as he walked away, one question lingered in his mind. Would this be the end of it, or just the beginning? If this story hit home for you, hit that subscribe button. Because stories like this, they're worth sharing.